Welcome everybody to this discussion of the book Vivekananda and Our Times, The Journey from Fear to Love by Rajni. So I was not really aware of Rajni's work, her previous books, and her journalistic work. But till she contacted me and asked me to be part of the discussion, which I was, of course, very glad to be. And when I bought her book, in her introduction, I found that she mentions my book as one of the recent books on Vivekananda that, kind of helps dispel some of the many myths about Vivekananda and throws some light on the real Vivekananda as opposed to the Vivekananda that has been appropriated by the Sangh Parivar. I was very grateful to for kindness in mentioning it. And in the introduction of my own book, I had written about the literature that is there about Vivekananda today. Now, it is not the case that not enough books are being produced about Vivekananda. In fact, every year, every major publisher brings out at least one book on Vivekananda. But there are some books that are critical of Vivekananda. I find them to be kind of shallow and slipshod, sometimes even ideologically prejudiced. But there are a lot of books that celebrate Vivekananda. But nonetheless, Vivekananda's ideas and the sense of his personality seems to have become lost to us. And I think the reason is that, and I like to use a metaphor here, of a mantra. Sometimes you hear a mantra and someone explains its meaning to you. But as you keep repeating it, keep hearing it, over time you lose what the mantra meant. And, it just becomes a sound, that familiar sound, very familiar, but it doesn't signify the meaning. And I think this is what happens to some extent to every historical figure, to every thinker, but it has happened particularly with Vivekananda. And so the problem with books about Vivekananda today have been that they don't look at Vivekananda through present-day issues, to the challenges that we face today, through the intellectual and cultural concerns that preoccupy us today. So it doesn't show the relevance of his thought and life to us and the way in which we can connect and use him. And when I went through Rajni's book, that is something that she has managed to do in an exceptionally great manner. Especially her essays on Vivekananda. So when I was reading them, I think her book is the best brief introduction to Vivekananda, the most accessible introduction to Vivekananda that I have read. And I think the value of something like that in this time is very, very, very important. Because unlike other introductions, they don't cloud the man, as I said. She specifically looks at him through what occupies us today, through the communal polarization we have been witnessing, through the assault of the Sangh Parivar polarizing into ideology, through the question of how to deal with violence, even about how to strengthen our democracy. And in reading her essays, one thing that struck me is that though the book is so very brief, and her familiarity with the material, with the complete work of Swami Vivekananda really comes through, because the incidents that she picks, the connections that she makes, the particular quotations that she chooses, shows someone who has really, really gone through his works. And though there have been some good books about Vivekananda that have come out recently, by good scholars. For example, Ruth Harris, the Oxford historian, published a decent book on Vivekananda called Good to the World. But when I go through it, what I find at many times is I feel she hasn't really trudged through and made Vivekananda's own philosophical works his own. She's depending at a lot of places on secondary material. But with Rajni, I find that even in so short a space, she shows that intimate familiarity, and Hence, she's able to give a glimpse into Vivekananda. She has caught somewhat of the essence of the man and his thought, even in these brief sketches. And of course, her essays in relating him to our current crisis are very thoughtful, insightful, and raises many, many questions that we urgently need to ask ourselves and find answers to. So, Rajni, one thing that would be of curiosity to everyone is the first section of your book, where the 6 essays that you had published in Times of India in the early 90s. How can you tell how exactly you came to write them, what the reaction of people was, and how it turned?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Govind, firstly for being here, and thanks to BIC for bringing us all together today. So actually, the first 1/3 of the book that Govind is referring to is a series of articles which I wrote for the Sunday Review, the Sunday section of the Times of India, back in '93. And that happened because, like I think most people of my generation and my political inclination, we were all going through a trauma, right, after 6th of December 1992. One, because people like me were sufficiently out of touch with reality that I really never thought it could happen. I really never thought it could happen. That was the level of, now I can claim that that was my level of confidence in the India that I had grown up in. Then somebody pointed out to me, this would be in December 92, that, how ironic it is that this is the centenary year of the Chicago Address. Because the Chicago Address is delivered, the first speech is delivered actually on 11 September, 9/11, 1893. And that totally blew me, that what an amazing and tragic coincidence this is. Because I, like most people, I had no real idea what he said in Chicago. But I knew that it was something about, the friendship between all religions and vague kind of information I had. And so, of course, I went running to Strand bookstore. This is all pre-internet era, where you had to actually physically go to a bookstore and find a book or collected works. And once I had read the Chicago speeches, I thought that this needs to be, shared with a very large number of people. Plus, I already knew, of course, that though at that time the propaganda machinery was not remotely what it is today, but I knew that friends in the Sangh Parivar were deeply influenced by Vivekananda also. And in January 93, towards the end of January 1993, I was part of a, you can describe it any way you like. I'm not going to add any adjectives to it. A meeting between people like myself who had grown up in the Gandhian liberal left-wing traditions with several leading activists of the RSS. The meeting had been planned well before. The idea of the meeting began in mid-92. Many more left, actually card-holding communists also were willing to come for this discussion. And they dropped out because after 6th December, they thought there was no point now. Because the original purpose of the meeting was to say, okay, bhai, come on, let's work it out. Why do you want to demolish the mosque? What will you gain? That kind of thing. Anyway, we met. We met for 4 days. Prashant Bhushan was one of the people in this meeting. Ravi Chopra, Maulana Wahiduddin Khan. It was from our side, it was star-studded, and from the RSS, the leading person was Govindacharya. And we sat for 4 days in an ashram in Vrindavan. So that whole, and I've talked about it in the second essay, that encounter also had a very big reason for why it became like a life and death thing for me to somehow tell the story of Vivekananda. And fortunately, the editor of the Sunday Review was a friend and a mentor. The book is partly dedicated to him, Darrell de Monte. He agreed to carry the series. So this is the context, and it's very kind of you to say nice things about the research, but I must completely confess that I have come to this work as a disturbed citizen. Actually, not my primary entry into this work is not as a scholar. It is as a disturbed citizen seeking answers. Ke bhai, can this man maybe help us? And as I wrote in an article in January on Swamiji's birthday, I think if we, even today, if as a society we can stop and ask why those 5 words which he begins with in Chicago. He just said 5 words, sisters and brothers of America. And the audience stood on its feet and started clapping like crazy. I mean, this is a topic we can talk about for hours. Why? So, the challenge, however, is, I realized very soon as I started reading the collected works, was not to do what many other people were doing, which is to cherry pick only for what you want to project. And I like to think that of course, I was also projecting something, really. I'm not just telling the story for entertainment's sake. But I want to think that what I was trying to put out there was more values and ideals related than ideology. And I do make a distinction. Right to life, unconditional equal right to dignity for all, to me is not an ideology. It's a fundamental value. It's a fundamental ethical frame, which hopefully is non-negotiable, regardless of what your ideology is. That was the faith with which I worked on this.
So you mentioned the Chicago speeches, right? It has become a staple part of our national imagination. We all know he went to Chicago and he delivered a speech. And it has come to be seen as a moment of national pride or even of Hindu pride. But as you mentioned this in your book, and around a year back, Yogendra also wrote about this, saying, but people actually forget what he actually said at the Chicago speeches. So, as you mentioned in your book, we should be looking at what did he actually say. So, can you just elaborate on that?
So, my favorite one, actually, I think it's the 3rd speech, which is perhaps the longest one. Forgive me about if I've got the sequence wrong. Which I have one article which is titled, I think, on that, where he says he takes on the Semitic religions. Not in an aggressive, not in a competitive way, but it's a parliament of world religions. The purpose of the gathering is to exchange notes. How have you seen divinity? How have you engaged with the what is greater than this mortal realm? All those are questions. So he is approaching it in that spirit, not in a spirit of one-upmanship. And he says, look, here is our difference. We don't believe that anybody is born a sinner. So this is a direct disagreement with the Semitic traditions, all 3. Because he says our fundamental insight is that we are all children of immortal bliss. Then he says, you will ask if this is true. This is still Swamiji saying, you may ask me, why then are we going around feeling we are finite beings who are miserable, who are unhappy, who are competitive, who have all the, human foibles? If our natural state is immortal bliss. And he says, well, I'll tell you honestly, this why question, we have been asking for 5,000 years in my culture, and we still don't have a decisive answer. To me, being able to say that, rather than just quote chapter and verse and claim to know everything, is a far greater statement of confidence than maine jhanda gaada. This is not a jhanda gaada statement. To me, that's why it's important.
So another thing that I found particularly interesting is that though Vivekananda did make a claim for Hinduism, and so did many of the representatives of Eastern religion assembled there, because all of them were on the back seat, and all of them wanted, because they were all colonized, and they wanted to say, we are as good as you, if not better. But the claim for that Vivekananda makes on the behalf of Hinduism is that we believe all religions to be true. It's not that we think we are superior. I think if we have a greatness that is beyond yours, is that we accept you. We not merely tolerate you, but we accept all religions as valid paths to the truth. Do you think that when a Hindu supremacy is being fostered on Vivekananda, do you think it is important to revoke that message?
It is. I mean, this is central. One is, of course, this very important statement, and it appears repeatedly in many places. That, in fact, sometimes he throws a tantrum about it. By the way, Vivekananda is a great one for throwing tantrums. A lot of them are in his private letters, but they are very charming. Even his tantrums I find very endearing. Where he says, what is this nonsense about tolerance? It means that I let you live. What greater arrogance could there be to say that, okay, I tolerate you? He says, no. What is desirable, what is required is that I must accept you as you are. So that's a very, very crucial feature. And also, to build on what you're saying, Govind, he is to me a kind of already post-colonial. See, and here actually I would like you to elaborate a little bit, because the importance of Govind's book is that he has not only told Vivekananda's story in and of itself with specific quotes and incidents, but he's also given the context in which it was happening. And see, there is a problem that I now realize, I confess, that all of us, our version of, our perception of the India we were growing up in and which we took for granted, thought that, okay, once upon a time somewhere there was prejudice, there was discrimination against Hindus, Indians, as brown people, etc. No, it's all in the thing in the past. Okay, here and there you get some racism, but, it's all, and we never really paid much attention to it. I must confess that I had never bothered to read what kind of, how to say it, aggressive denigration happened of the Indic culture through the colonial period, both here and in the West. So I feel, Govind, if you can little bit tell us about that, because then we can come to the present. Because anyway, you say you answer my request, and then I'll build on why I'm asking this.
So I think one of the reasons Vivekananda has been really misunderstood, in the sense that the right has been trying to appropriate him since the 70s. So very interestingly, Vivekananda never inspires any of the Sangh Parivars. So if you go through Golwalkar's work, if you go through Savarkar, they are not looking at Vivekananda at all. At best, they take his name as a placeholder, but no influence. His influence was rather on the national movement. He inspired Subhash Bose to an extraordinary degree. He had an influence on Gandhi, and Nehru interestingly gave a speech at the Ramakrishna Mission on Vivekananda, which they published now as a book, in which he says that Vivekananda was one of the great founders of the national movement. And he inspired many people of my generation who joined the movement. And what is really interesting is, how did they see Vivekananda? Because when you look at Bose and what he's saying, he says that Vivekananda, without this gospel of the harmony of all religions, of Ramakrishna and Vivekananda, it is not possible for us to have a freedom movement, because India cannot be a country of only Hindus or Muslims. So why is it that his message of universalism was understood as such then and was taken up by liberals and progressives. And why is it that coming to our age, the right appropriates him, and from the liberal left academia, there is a parallel process of, it's almost like they converge. Only that what the right thinks is a virtue, the left liberals would think it's a vice. And one of the reasons is, I think, as far as the left liberals are concerned, and perhaps even for someone who might casually pick up Vivekananda and read him now, they'll find all these praises of Hinduism, sometimes using things that we think are stereotypes today, spiritual East and the materialistic West. So that's because we have completely forgotten the historical circumstances that existed then. It's really the extent to which this was a colonial encounter often escapes us. It is true that, so Vivekananda spent I think 70% of his output in his writings or in his speeches happened in the West, mainly in the United States, but also in
because his prolific years are largely spent there.
Largely spent there, yeah. His career was short. His public career was just 9 years. So there it was, Vivekananda was preaching religion to people who had colonized India. And we know, starting with Edward Said's book about how imperialism does not merely function through military might or economic might. There has to be an active delegitimization of the culture, religion, and civilization of the conquereds. So this happened at two levels. It happened at the official level, which the East India Company and later the British government encouraged, starting with Macaulay's famous minutes. And it happened also through the activities of Christian missionaries from the West, who were not really working in tandem with the government. In fact, the government usually earlier opposed their activity, but at this level of discourse, it converged. If you look at the kind of vituperative attacks that they carried out on Hinduism, it was, of course, Vivekananda was large-hearted enough to try and look at it from their point of view, and they come here and they say idol worship and, immediately connect it to Balok or worship of Maul or something. But it is and these stereotypes about India went back to the West, back to America, back to Britain. And when Vivekananda goes there, some of the questions he's asked about India are like, why do Hindu mothers throw their babies into the Ganges for the crocodiles to eat? And these are serious questions when he's addressing an audience. So he's perceived as coming from a completely inferior religion and civilization. A defeated civilization. And these stereotypes are... so once Vivekananda answered, because he had this question so many times that, yeah, they do actually do that. And I was also thrown into the Ganges when I was a baby, but I was a very fat baby, and the crocodiles sort of threw me back. And that was, but it kind of shows, he uses humor to deal with the situation that's really frustrating. So Vivekananda had in many ways so he was casually introduced as a pagan, which is a very patronizing this. And often this came from well-intentioned people who were sponsoring his talks. Yeah. So the attack from the other side, the Orthodox clergy, would have been far, far more... so for Vivekananda, his ultimate aim was to preach spirituality. But to do that, he had to stake out an equal space. It wasn't... If you had tried to apologize and say, look, I am as good as you guys, it would not have worked. So he took a comparative stance and said, no, I am actually better than you guys. Once he had cleared the ground, he would say, or when that cultural gap did not exist, he would preach his message. It's actually a message of spiritual universalism. But Vivekananda's glorification of Hinduism is use of what now has become stereotypes of Eastern spirituality and Western materialism and all that. were not stereotypes in at that time. And they were not a conservative stand. They were a stand of resistance to a colonial ecosystem in which he had to find a voice. In fact, Ruth Harris's book does a good job of mapping this out in quite some detail. But I think this is very important to recognize, because at his time, there's no way he could have imagined. When he talks about the Christians, they are the ruling class, the ruling race in India. When he talks about Islam, though the Ottoman Empire is decaying, it is still a world power. So both these religions at the international stage, as a presence where the Hindus are just seen as very queer people with extraordinarily weird customs and completely mired in poverty and a failed civilization. So the things he said then was to inspire a sense of confidence in Indians, especially Hindus, because most of the attacks came on the Hindus. I don't know why, but requires historical investigations, but the West saw India as primarily a Hindu country. Could be because they were already familiar with Islam, and maybe Hindus were more exotic to them. But Vivekananda's effort were to inspire confidence in India's own civilization, in the validity of the Hindu tradition, and from that point, work forward. But read today, everything is dramatically opposite, because whatever he says about Hinduism becomes a glorification of the majority if you read it in the light of our times, and what he says about Christianity or Islam would become, could naturally be read of as criticism of a powerless minority.
But that depends on what you quote, because the same Vivekananda has many statements which convey his love for Jesus and his understanding of the beauty of Christianity and of Islam. So, that is the whole problem with any kind of propaganda machinery. It is a propaganda machinery that picks and chooses to serve a limited partisan purpose. But the reason, thank you, Govind. I felt it was important to bring all this in, because unless we are aware of this background, we can't fully understand what today the ideology of Hindutva is able to trigger. Now, maybe this is not the forum to go into the details of the psychological, I'm going to call it a psychosis of a kind, that has surfaced, just now. But my reading of the situation is that it is fundamentally a self-esteem crisis. And it may be only of the Indian middle class. I am not sufficiently knowledgeable to know how far, if you look at society vertically, I don't know how far to the roots it is going. But the key difference that I am seeing between the post-independence culture and today's increasingly dominant culture is that for us, those of us who grew up in that Gandhi, Nehru, Lohia, Vivekananda, Aurobindo world, is that the travails of the past are in the past. They are not driving what we do today. Okay, let me put it this way. I am from a partition-affected family. Okay, both sides of my family came from Lahore and Peshawar, respectively, in 47. I'm here because I had smart ancestors. They prejudged the situation and they left before the massive rioting began. Otherwise, I don't know who would have survived and who would have not. And I grew up, so this is a personal experience. It's not a scholarship. I grew up in a family where we were constantly told what happened was wrong from every possible angle that you can look at it. Everybody did terrible things to each other. There was no victim and perpetrator. I mean, in specific, of course, in every specific act of violence, there was a victim and there was a perpetrator. But both sides as such did their thing, did terrible things. And we must now look to the future. The future has to be different. And it can only be different if we reject this approach to conflict. I mean, it was not said in these words, you understand. So, to me, the importance of Vivekananda is that if we truly get to know him, not just play around with suitable quotations, then we see a man struggling with these processes. We see a man who is struggling. He does have anger. He is upset about destroyed temples. He is not indifferent to the fact that temples were destroyed. And he's processing and sublimating these emotions. And of course, he's able to do it fundamentally because he's Ramakrishna's disciple. But that's not only the reason. That those, 3 years that he travels across India?
4 years.
Almost 4 years. Those 4 years are a very crucial part. Why? Because it is in those 4 years that he gets to struggle, for example, with his own problems with caste. My favorite story, I think it's there in one of the stories, in one of the articles. I won't find it now. I'll just narrate it from memory. So he loved his smoke. He's a smoker. He loves his chillam. And he's walking in some rural area. And one laborer kind of person is sitting there having his smoke. And so Swamiji says, come on, give me a puff. And the man says, no, I am a bhangi. No, aisa karke he goes back like this. So Swamiji also walks on, and then he goes a few steps and he says, what is wrong with me? Why did I accept that? If I'm a sadhu, really, I must get above all this. So he goes back to the same man and insists. Actually, I personally think he intimidates him, quite frankly. Imagine that, handsome, big fellow, orange robes and everything. I mean, he really has to almost snatch the chillam, because why? That poor man is saying, स्वामी जी मेरा कर्म खराब होगा, आपको कुछ नहीं होगा, पाप मुझे लगेगा अगर मेरी चिल्लम आपकी मुंह लगेगी तो. When he sees this reality, that not only he is deemed to be the lowest of the low, but that he has been brought up, it's so deeply internalized that it is his job to preserve the purity of the upper caste. So all this is what, shapes him and then is boiling in the cauldron.
And I mean, this is just as an aside, and you also mentioned it in your book, but what I found very funny, and this irreverence is there throughout Vivekananda. You often forget what a fun person he was. He went back and narrated this story to his Guru Bhais, that is other disciples of Ramakrishna, as it's a great epiphany, and they're like, you are just too addicted to smoking. That's all. It's nothing to do with caste.
Yeah, that's wonderful. They all said to him, what rubbish, you are not past, you've not got me on caste or anything. You will do anything for a smoke. And he also admits, the final punchline you have to give. He says, well, it's true. If I ever get detachment, I'll let you know. So this, self-deprecating also, and I'm not saying that he doesn't have moments of being very self-important. I'm not trying to create some glorified superstar, but it is his struggles. Same with the incident with the temple. This actually is in Nivedita's works. She's the record keeper of this experience, where it's in Kashmir somewhere. He goes to a destroyed Devi temple. Who knows when it was demolished, by whom, but there it is, it's in shambles. And he has like an eruption of rage. And he says, what is this? He's talking to the Devi. How can you let intruders do this to you? And the answer comes back, am I your protector or are you my protector? And the rage flips completely. Is that an adequate description of?
Yeah, though I don't think he was angry as so much as
Hurt. He's grieving.
He's grieving, and he says that if I were here at that time, I would not have allowed the temple to be destroyed. And if I remember his exact words that Nivedita records, she says the goddess speaks to him and suddenly and says, are you my protector or am I to protect you? The temple was broken down by the invaders because I will it. If I want to, I can at this moment raise a 7-storied gold-plated temple here. So he comes out of this with, and this is an unusual experience for Vivekananda because he was an Advaitist, and though he had a kind of slightly, when he went into moods of bhakti, he would get really carried away, but he will recoil from this, saying, no, you should not be enslaved to any conception of something that is other than yourself. Because in Advaita, there's no difference between God and so. In this thing, it's interesting that after this experience, he goes into this weeks of great devotional ecstasy towards the mother goddess, which Nivedita records. And at its culmination, he decides to do a ritual worship that Ramakrishna used to do. It was, I think, part of the Shakta worship tradition where you have a small girl, and usually, of course, it was an upper caste.
It's a kind of a Kumari Puja.
Kumari Puja.
Many North Indians are familiar with.
So it's a young girl, and you worship her as a literal incarnation of the Devi bodily. So what is interesting is that Vivekananda decided to do this ceremony on the 4-year-old daughter of his Muslim boatsman. Now, if someone does this today, I suppose there will be cases registered and errors made. But it just shows that for Vivekananda, every religious tradition was just a tool.
Yeah.
There was no proprietary sense of Hinduism for him because he says several times that it's not important whether you believe in the Hindu book, the Jewish book, or the Quran. It's irrelevant. And once he tells a Western audience that Hinduism is as much your property as mine. The entire project of Hindutva is based on mobilizing an identity about a monopoly of Hindu cultural markers, religious markers. So in this context, one of the most quoted Vivekananda quote is, "Arise and awake."
Rise and awake.
And stop not till the goal is reached. Now it is used as a clarion call to Hindus, but what was it actually? What did it function in his thought, his philosophy?
So the very first dimension is internal. It is still in that children of immortal bliss sense. Because this is a thought world, a spirit world that he's inhabiting, where fundamental quest is spiritual. Everything else is a matter of fleeting detail at one level. So fundamentally it is arise and awake to the fact that you are a child of immortal bliss. That's number one. But also very much this, by the time he is almost ready to go, the end of the 1800s, because he's gone by 1902. And he knows that he has a short life. He has a very conscious sense of this, that he won't live very long. It is also about the society. But it is not, of course there is overthrow the yoke of oppression, all that is there. But to me, now this is a matter of interpretation, I think it's fundamentally about let us see what is failing in us. Let us correct what we are doing wrong to each other. And on that strength, we will be able to build a better society. And with that strength, we will overthrow the foreign yoke, which is what that's what finds fruition in Gandhi.
So just to add to that,
Hind Swaraj to me is this voice in a much more passionate and rooted in the political reality.
So just to add to that, Vivekananda's attitude towards the British rule is more ambivalent than one would think at first. That he was a nationalist in the sense that he wanted Indian regeneration, but I mean, if you look at the statements he makes about the Congress, in a sense, he falls into the early debate between the social reformers in Congress and the political reformers, right? In a sense, Vivekananda was more towards the social reform camp, where he felt that Indian society has to become more equitable before trying for political control. Because he says this, if you just, the British just hands over power to you, the powerful, I mean the upper caste and the rich, would just oppress the powerless. Which anticipates Ambedkar. And he also, his idea of spirituality, and this is where he differs so much from most of his predecessors in the tradition, is that yes, it is realization of the truth for yourself, but it is also an effort to ameliorate the condition of people. And it didn't mean just, so he had many levels. First, he wanted Indians to regenerate their own society. He also wanted them to help other nations. So when he say, to me, when at least in the context I have read him use arise and awake phrase, it is a call to inner realization, to serving people, to serving the world. And I do not really think that he ever uses it in a context that is specific to Hinduism.
No, I agree with that. No, it's not specific to Hinduism as such, except that is his context. That's his
context. That's
his
true.
domain. I mean, that is his lived experience in that sense. See, also what I think is emerging out of all this, and I hope that in the Q&A, Ram will add something to this. What is emerging then is that today what we are understanding or we are being told it is to be Hindu actually doesn't exist in his lifetime. That whole construct takes shape really from about 1920s, approximately. I'm not saying the roots or the shades of it may be
It
around.
is being made in his time, and he is part of the process of making it. But
Because
yeah,
Bankim is a contemporary.
Yeah, but he is not addressing a stable identity. It's still something that is being made. But yeah, by the 1920s, it probably stabilizes. By the time Gandhi comes on the scene, it has stabilized. But it is still quite fluid in his time, in Vivekananda's time.
Yeah. I just want to share that, when I did this series, I mean, because I have tried in this exercise also to be self-critical and at least introspective. I've not shared it in such an explicit way, but when I wrote this series in 93, many of my left friends said, what, now you have also turned saffron. So there has been a problem of people on the left side of the political spectrum painting with too broad a brush and not being willing to see the many shades of the legacies that shaped our present. And some of that is what I feel we are now seeing a reaction against. This is an explanation, it's not a justification, please. And I felt then, and I feel it even more strongly now, that the onus of reaching out, in a sense, literally across the fence is more on our side.
That brings me to, I think, a very important question, which is in the last section of the book. You're writing about what does Vivekananda speak to us today, right now, in 2024. And looking at the situation, what you are arguing is that, and that is, I think, the subtitle of the book, From Fear to Love, that Vivekananda, like Buddha, said, you cannot return injury for injury, hate for hate. And Sita is an ideal.
Sita is the embodiment of that.
And you're saying that we have to try and understand even those who support the construction of the Ram Mandir and the demolition of the Babri Masjid, and people who are, who feel this sense of what he called an inadequacy in the Hindu psyche.
I mean, the current term is hurt Hindu pride.
Hurt Hindu pride. And you also say we shouldn't use quotes against, pick quotes from Vivekananda and use it against. But my own whole book was a political project where you're saying we should use Vivekananda against the Sangh Parivar, because it's not of course, there's a problem in separating ideology from fundamental values. It overlaps. So while you cannot perhaps not say Vivekananda is ideologically opposed to the Sangh Parivar, at the level of ideas or values, he is as opposite as they are. And I think the reason I think we should take a more combative approach is because the propaganda is extraordinary. I mean, it's the mainstream media, it's the social media, where the right-wing propaganda on Hindutva and catering and to the herd Hindu pride, building it up. So within such an ecosystem, while I agree with you that what we should learn is try and understand the other and move from fear to love. But practically, how do you work this out?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly have no answer to the question itself in that how do you deal with this sophisticated a level of propaganda? I honestly, I don't know. That's not my area of expertise or anything. And we've seen in the 20th century, okay, we know where it goes. It's not a new experience. I mean, some of it may be at a new level of efficiency. Okay, so maybe what I'm saying is, you could, if you call me naive, then I'll say guilty as accused, but I hope I'm not. I am differentiating the realm in which propaganda operates. So just bear with me, this is a thought exercise. From the actual lived life of the individual. Okay, so I'll give you an example. I have a cousin who is very much totally on board he's a self-admitted passionate bhakt. He calls himself a super bhakt. So it was a dinner table moment, whole family was there, and I can't remember where the thing started, but he said, "हम तो कहेंगे, गर्व से कहो हम हिंदू हैं, कोई नहीं हमें रोक सकता." और मैं कहा, कौन रोक रहा है? I said, but nobody is stopping you. Why do you feel anybody is stopping you? But would you consider changing garv to prem? What is the difference? How, in what it makes you feel? And again, as I said, if I am deemed to be naive, then so be it. But I still firmly feel, like I can't say I know, but it's an instinctive grip on me that real life is still lived at this level. Yes, propaganda can affect it. It does affect it. It can sway it. But I mean, I am just addressing the everyday person in their everyday life. Partly because I don't have an answer, for what will overturn the propaganda machinery, except to say that as and when some genius comes along and is able to answer that in its own terms, in any case, the job of working with Samaj remains. That job doesn't go away. And even if it's not a job, each one of us as discrete individuals still has to live that everyday life. And that is the big change, no? That everybody, I'm sure all of us know multiple people who are struggling with this in their own family, in their office, in their friend circle. So it's at that level when I say that if we can think of engaging empathically in those moments, what are currently either abusive exchanges, they cannot be called conversations, or they are completely broken down, which is that people walk out of the room, they decide either not to talk to each other or they mark out areas. Many people have reported that they are continuing in the family by marking out areas of things that cannot be touched, that will not be discussed. Because it becomes too acrimonious, it becomes too painful, things are said which people later regret. So in a sense, if we can, okay, so my friend Pavan is here, and she works very closely with a lady called Monica Sharma, who has developed a whole methodology, which she has used in very, very, very deep conflict areas. She developed the methodology when she was working in the UN. The nutshell of it is, can we listen for the concern behind the complaint? See, what happens is that now the complaint is an all-purpose word here. You can say the offensive thing that has been said, the aggressive thing that has been said. It can be hate, it can be an exhortation to violence, whatever. And it is painful. I am not going to say it's easy. But sometimes it can open avenues of exchange. That's my only hope, Govind. I am not saying it's an all-purpose solution or anything, but as a person living an everyday life in this samaj, that's all I have been able to come up with.
I agree.
And it's not me individually, sorry, I must report. This is not me like privately or single-handedly. I've said that in the acknowledgements, that there are so many people who have been part of this process. Many of them are in the room today. Rohini, Pavan, so many people. Usha. You said, we were in a discussion and Usha said, the discussion was, what is this? Why should there be a Manu statue in the Jaipur High Court? And Usha said, obviously she knows and she feels also maybe that knee-jerk reaction that we all have to Manusmriti. But she said, maybe we need to look. What is it about this Manu that means something to the people who are putting it up? And it is possible that the full picture that they're after, we may not agree with. But there may be some nuances. I'll give you a real life example. It's from Ahimsa Conversations, which is a YouTube channel that I curate. I started it in 2020. So Bhavar Meghvanshi is a Dalit activist in Rajasthan. And one of the problems that they are still having is that if a Dalit is taking out a barat and the Dalit groom has got on a ghoda, which is the traditional upper caste way of a bridegroom to arrive at the bride's home, the upper caste people will harass him, throw mud on him, try to pull him off the horse, that kind of thing. And in one area, there was a particular samaj that was doing this. So Bhavar and his friends initiated a dialogue with that leadership of that samaj. They had even today, many of these caste groups are organized. I mean, they have their, like a jati panchayat, like that. And he started by gifting them a copy of the Constitution. Yeah. And then he, I think he took them a picture of Ashoka, I think it is. He gifted them one of Ambedkar and one of Ashoka, saying that, he was also these are all Kshatriya castes. In the Varna system, whatever the jati may be, in the 4 caste category, they are the Kshatriyas. And he said, look, maybe it's time to re-look at what valor really means. How is it valorous to pull down a groom from the horse, when he is 5 feet away from the bride's home? इसमें valor कहाँ है? आप तो valor वाले लोग हैं. Veer ras. He invoked that. And I'm not saying the problem is fully solved. But that Jati Panchayat did send out a message to its community that this has to stop.
On the whole, I agree with what you're saying, both in the sense that I think one has to understand though we may not agree with it, but one has to uh, understand the anxieties that drive people towards sympathizing with Hindutva. If one were to effectively intervene in this, because the form of intervention would be different. I mean, you might, for example, instead of talking about the constitution, you might talk about a story from the Mahabharata, which would, make sense to them. If you're talking about Ram Mandir, you might talk about a story from Ramayana and say, this is what Ram did. So I totally, I agree with this. And it's interesting that I think if you have got this from Vivekananda, that is very interesting, because Vivekananda actually really spoke about this. In fact, when he went to the UK, he later writes that no man stepped on English soil with more hatred in my heart towards them, and no man loves the English as much as I do now. And this at a time when the tide of relationship between the Bengali Bhadralok and the British was starting to change. The late 19th century, it started changing from 70s onwards, and there was more animosity. And when that was the ascendant feeling, Vivekananda, during a large gathering where he Margaret Noble and other British friends are present, he tells them that I went to England, and these were my feelings, and people present here can testify to that. Yeah. But today there's no one among you, friends, and he's addressing Indians who love the British as much as I do. Yeah. And he says most of the things that happen is that we don't know their ways, they don't know our ways, and misunderstandings arise. And this is not a person who is naive. This is a person who has seen the world, who completely understands the political implications of colonialism, of exactly what the British are doing. But this insight, which I think is completely lacking in the left liberal response to Hindutva, that there is a tendency to just morally condemn, these people are all, they're not secular enough, they are castes, this, that. It ultimately is no solution, because to achieve a political goal is to ultimately change the mind of people. And that is what you see someone like Gandhi doing. Yeah. That throughout his career, and I'm sure Ram would probably speak a bit on this, that he was in conflict with the traditional society and he set about to change it, often taking contrary stances, then changing his stance, but he was able to change the mind of Hindu society towards the lower caste to a large extent. In fact, I would think it is even without Gandhi's work, though, because you set up this contrast between Gandhi and Ambedkar. Without Gandhi's early works, I wonder if it would have possible for Ambedkar to address, whether the upper caste Hindus would have even given Ambedkar a hearing. So this is something, I think this is a very valuable insight.
Yeah. Shall we take a few questions? Yeah, now?
Questions? Any? Comments, questions?
Yeah, so as someone who is an avid admirer of Swamiji, so I've always wondered so Swamiji talks a lot about manliness, man-making. What does how do we characterize Swamiji's idea of strength and manliness?
Yeah, one sec, if I may. I couldn't decide what was worth quoting. It's not directly in answer to your manliness question, but it's kind of. Oh, yeah, here it is. So this is from the last few pages. I think I'll read a little longer. Give me a few more minutes. The gravity of confidence between... I'm sorry, I don't know how far I should go back. I should also please here acknowledge, it's my mistake, I should have done it at the beginning, that my search was deeply influenced also by the guidance of monks of the Ramakrishna mission today. And that's an important, I've kind of explained that at the end because I knew that what I'm suggesting about the empathic approach will seem very unreal. But so the crucial moment actually happened in 93 itself, before I started writing these articles. I happened to be in Calcutta and I met Swami Bhuteshanand ji, who was then the president of the Mutt. And you know, I was in bad shape and I think I was almost crying when I asked him, how does one live in such times? I feel we live in terrible times. And unka kya tha ki when you went and sat in front of him, na, he had an assistant, he would give one toffee to you, automatic, it was autopilot. So when he heard me and he saw me, he gave a gesture, you know, and then he said, made the assistant give me an extra toffee. Pehle to, he gave me one extra toffee. He said, देखो, I'll say it in Hindi and if you like I'll translate. काल कभी अच्छा या बुरा नहीं होता. Time is never good or bad. क्योंकि जीवन हर काल में संग्राम है. In all times, life is a noble struggle. सिर्फ सवाल ये नहीं होता कि दूसरे क्या कर रहे हैं. सवाल सिर्फ ये होता है कि आपने क्या करना है. What are you going to do? That is all that matters. So I quote that story and I suggest the gravity of confidence behind Swami Bhuteshanand's words opened spaces within. It lessened the domination of fear within. This advice can be a fair wind in the sails of anyone journeying from fear to love. It is only then that we might be able to see beyond the surface. Looking beneath, we may find that the hatred and resentment roiling on the surface is actually fear and a desperate vulnerability. This is why Swami Vivekananda urges us to be heroes and equates sturdy manliness with the overcoming of afflictive emotions. That's hatred, anger, jealousy, envy. These are the afflictive emotions. And then this is Swamiji. Never can hatred and malice vanish from one's heart unless one becomes a hero. And unless one is free from these, how can one become truly civilized? But the freedom and heroism that Swamiji is referring to may not be possible without at least an appreciation, if not acceptance, of the metaphysics that anchored his deep confidence that each one of us has the potential to be free. And his impeccable logic is as follows. 1. Everything in time and space and causation is bound. You see, in Hindi we say bhautik jagat. 2. But the soul is beyond all time, all space and all causation. It is nature that is bound, not the soul. Therefore, he reasoned, proclaim your freedom and be what you are. Again, this is a quote. Ever free, ever blessed. And then I say that in case you're uncomfortable with the word soul, here is another way that he's able to help you. He says, the Vedanta teaches men to have faith in themselves first. As certain religions of the world say that a man who does not believe in a personal God outside of himself is an atheist, so the Vedanta says a man who does not believe in himself is an atheist.
Further questions? Yeah.
Thank you. I found the discussion and the interview fascinating. Thank you so much. I just like to, you touched upon this point of universalism, both of you, and I think if we could go back to that and view it in its historical context, what I would like to know as a student of history is a little bit more about perhaps the impact of, say, Brahmoism on Vivekananda and the early, it's particularly during the early years, because this also shaped his thinking. In the context of universalism, I say this is particularly important because you're talking about the Brahmo Samaj then, at that time, which was also talking about the new dispensation. And just as much as Swami Ji was in Chicago, so also was Pratap Chandra Mazumdar as well. So perhaps we could look at those, because Samaj comes into that as well, and see how we can perhaps relate it to the present today as well.
Yeah. I think Govind should answer this question, but I'll just add one small detail, how those times were different. Right. So Ramakrishna ji is never he doesn't take, he honors them, he doesn't ridicule them or anything, the Brahmo Samaj, but he thinks, okay, theek hai, I mean, acha hai, but it doesn't in any way connect with his search. But he and apne kya naam unka, the leader at that time of the Brahmo Samaj, who dies very early. Keshav Chandra. They are such good friends that if you read the gospel, there is every time you read it, you feel like weeping, where Keshav Chandra is dying. And Thakur goes to meet him. And he sits in front of him and he is weeping, कि now if you're gone, who will I talk to? So ye dekho. He doesn't agree, he doesn't have much, he's not very impressed with the Brahmo Samaj effort. But that doesn't in any way affect the depth of his equation with Keshav Chandra. Yeah. But these are qualities of being.
You are asking from a particularly historical perspective. There have been a lot of speculation on the source of Vivekananda's universalism among Vivekananda scholars. Some people attribute it to the influence of Western liberalism. Some people point to the Brahmo Samaj, others to Ramakrishna's. But the fact is that Vivekananda, in all his phases of his life, was exposed to universalism. He grew up in a very cosmopolitan family. His father was exceptionally cosmopolitan. He was well-versed. Even he was as much part of the Hindu culture as he was part of the Islamic culture. He knew Urdu, Persian, I'm not sure about Arabic, Sanskrit, and he brought up, so he used to apparently read both the Gita and the Quran every day. So Vivekananda was brought up in that atmosphere where every religion was considered, automatically assumed universalism. And when it comes to Brahmo Samaj, what attracts him is not is universalism, because he's already imbibed that, but rather it's claimed to be a more rational religion than traditional Hinduism. And so I'm not sure that this Brahmo Samaj had, and of course Vivekananda's universalism really takes off in the light of Ramakrishna's experiences, where Ramakrishna says that he practices Christianity, Islam, the various sects of Hinduism, and he has the same mystical experience of oneness at the end of it all. So that is probably the most powerful influence on him. The Brahmo Samaj was, I tend to think of it as an important but passing phase in Vivekananda's evolution. And when you mentioned Pratap Chandra Mazumdar, there's a sad part to the story, which is that in Chicago, when Mazumdar also spoke, Annie Besant spoke, and there were other people from India. Apparently, at least from the accounts that we get from Vivekananda's complete works and the accounts of his disciples, Mazumdar grew very jealous of Vivekananda's success and went on a slander campaign against Vivekananda. And at least Vivekananda seemed to believe that he produced some of the worst stories possible about him, trying to impede his works. But it's very interesting to show that some of letters Vivekananda is anguished at Mazumdar, what Mazumdar is doing. He said he's gone back to Calcutta and is spreading rumors that, I am engaged in the worst kind of sexual profligacy with Western women. And he's like, I have a mother who, I left her to become a renunciate. I think she'll die if she hears this. And what I find really interesting about Vivekananda is, after writing this letter, 2 weeks later, he writes to somebody saying, I'm really sorry about this fit of envy that came across Mazumdar, because he's really a great and good man who throughout his life has only tried to do good to his people. That equanimity is extraordinary, is something really extraordinary that I see in Vivekananda, and throughout his correspondence you can see this.
book you may want to check. It's, I think, by a America-based Swami, young Swami of the Ramakrishna Mission. His name is Medhanand. And the book is Universal Vedantism?
No, cosmopolitan.
Cosmopolitan Vedantism. Thank you. You had a question.
My question is about more contemporary issues, but before that, one thing you said that Vivekananda and also Ramakrishna talked about Jesus and Christianity, but I thought they never really equated Jesus with Christianity. They always kept Christianity and Jesus completely differently. Whereas they were all gung-ho about Jesus, that was not the case with Christianity. Number one. Number two is Arise Awake is actually not a quote from Vivekananda. He was quoting Kathopanishad. Uttishtata Jagrata Prapavaran Nivodhat. Yeah, so he quoted this. Now my question is, I have friends from both the sides, close school friends. So school friends are those you can't shake away. Even if you shake away, they cry and then come back and pull you into it. And in school WhatsApp group, you know what kind of nonsense can be passed on as truth. And I have card holding members of the Communist Party, and I have what you said, Param Bhaktas. The question you raised was, how can you create a dialogue? Because today, dialogue is out of the question, out of the window. The question is, how can you create a dialogue where people can bring in data points and not their all kinds of fancy ideas and opinions and discourse?
Shall I take the first question and you can answer second? Thing is, as far as Ramakrishna was concerned, Christianity, he had very little knowledge about Christianity as a religion. For him, Christ was Christianity. For Vivekananda, however, he both criticized Christianity, but then his criticism is very similar to the criticism of several liberal sects of modern Christianity, which says that there is the Christianity of Christ and there is Pauline Christianity, which leads to the church and church doctrines. So, in that sense, he makes a separation, but it's a separation that many Christians themselves have made. And the other thing is, Vivekananda was deeply, he had attachment to many elements of the Christian tradition. So it was not merely the Christ or the Virgin Mary to whom he prayed, but he visited Rome, and he went into raptures of ecstasy, seeing the architecture there, and he would talk about this to friends who accompanied him, and he was fascinated with everything to do with early Roman Christianity and monasticism. In fact, there is a seminary in Goa which Vivekananda visits, and he spends 3 days there going through ancient documents left behind by Jesuit priests, and he has theological discussions with the priests there. In fact, the Rajul Seminary still has a picture of Vivekananda to commemorate his visit, and in the West, according to one person who witnessed his conversations with an ex-Catholic priest, he says Vivekananda's knowledge of Christian ecclesiastical history was so deep that he was able to remember the dates of particular church councils when the priest that he was talking to could not recall to this.
But I think it would be fair to say that both for Vivekananda and Gandhi, the bottom line is the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah, true enough.
While all this is also true, that for them the essence of Christ is the Sermon on the Mount. That's my reading. Yeah, there was one more hand there.
There was a question about dialogue.
Yeah, but... Huh?
There was a question about dialogue.
Oh, sorry, right. That got left out. Yeah. So there are, if people are willing to make the time, we do actually have, right among us, many effective methodologies. But it means that people have to make time. It means spending 2-3 days. As I said, my friend Pavin is part of a group that does facilitate. It has been done. It has been tried and tested. I'm not saying it's a magic wand or anything. But it is extremely helpful. Even if people are not transformed, hearts do melt. In that. So it's possible, but I really don't know. Certainly within WhatsApp, there is no answer. That's for sure. In that domain, there is no answer. Sorry. I think there was one hand there. Sorry, we'll just come back to you.
I'll not talk about Vivekananda, but to me, he incorporates all the values that emerged in the West through the Reformation, the Enlightenment, and the Renaissance, to summarize it. But to come to our times, what you said was a man who doesn't believe in himself is an atheist. But a man who believes that he belongs to the only religion is a coward or a devil. And the biggest problem today, I belong to an Abrahamic religion. I grew up to believe that we were the only ones. From there, I moved and with the world to tolerate others. You mentioned this word. Toleration to me is I accept you until I can dominate you. So you can't talk about toleration. So I moved then through my own experience in the Bangladesh war to respect for people. And respect is a totally different thing. And I was so involved with the refugees that I moved to empathy. Now, I think empathy is something where you identify with people. The problem today is traditional Hinduism, which I have always respected, that's why I'm in India, is becoming like the Abrahamic religions. That's exactly what's happening. And you can't get out of it because it has all the advantages today. We are going to have to live through it. I'm not certain. I think the mistakes have been made. We spoke about secularism. It has the way we understood it was the way the West understood it, separation between religion and society. That's not possible in India. It's here in India, you recognize that all religions are equal. So you cannot talk about we speak about conversion. The very fact that you are talking about conversion means you don't respect people. So we made a lot of mistakes. I can mention several. There's no doubt there was a certain tendency to work closely with the minorities after the partition because you had to give that sense of security. But it continued, just like other things continued. So I mean, today the situation is such that lines are being drawn. I'm an economist, sorry, although I'm delving in subjects which I'm not an expert in. So I can see the lines drawn clearly. And economics has a place. If a man is knocked down from a horse, it's not just from the sociological part, it's also economics. I need him to work for me, It's a mixture of things. So we have to face the situation today. How to face it is still, I think there are many, there are many objectives, but the fact remains that we have to look at reality today and try to not confront it, but first understand it properly, and then hope for the best.
Thank you so much. And then we are coming back. I know there was a hand over there.
If I could just add a comment to what you said about conversions. If I could just add a comment, that Vivekananda's own view on conversion was that it was not desirable because it took a person from a certain traditional spiritual tradition, a milieu, and placed him. And it could do that person great damage. But he never opposed the missionaries' right to preach their religion or convert. And so I think we need to make a distinction in our public discourse between the legal right to conversion, to propagate your religion, which comes from our fundamental rights in the Constitution, and the fact that perhaps it is not morally desirable in most circumstances. When we have rights that we do not always use, which we may use with restraint. So I think this distinction between the moral or spiritual dimension of conversion and the legal right to conversion is important. The one we have to protect at all costs. The other we need to bolster.
But just one more comment to that. When I speak to some of my friends who are pretty strong RSS people, they feel that this attitude of compromise, love, integration, which mainline Hinduism has known, has made the society weak. And that is the Abrahamic religions with the only provides you with a certain moral justification to do anything you want. Now, I fully understand that. And therefore the reaction is we too have to really adopt a situation where morally we can claim to do certain things. Of course, it has not yet developed into I can morally therefore have a justification to kill you. But I surely have a moral justification to make you a second-class citizen.
Thank you so much, Al Fernandez, who is a legendary leader of the social sector and a pioneer of microfinance. Thank you so much, Al. No, lovely. I'm so glad you're here.
A central feature of politics is to offer a message of hope. And so the challenge is how to make hope tangible. And the right, for all its flaws, has a very tangible and simple message. Whereas the left talks in abstract principles of secularism and rights, and which is not, it's harder to convey. And even the Vedantic message that Vivekananda aligns with asks for a necessary introspection that cultivates a spiritual and moral alertness. So that's like saying you have to do the work to figure out what hope is. So that automatically creates a distance from politics, and which requires some kind of restructuring. So how do we restructure politics so that this side of it can offer that tangible message of hope?
I feel that we should keep in the foreground the fact that actually as a species we have never been in this place before. Because the speed of life, and by speed I mean also the speed of the cognitive bombardment on a daily basis, that pretty much every, even if you're not madly on social media, etc., the cognitive bombardment of various kinds of stimulation is unprecedented. So I think we really, in many ways, we do have to reinvent the wheel. In that sense, I completely empathize with, what Govind is saying, that, what you're saying in that last chapter is all very nice, but how does it help us to act in the here and now? And I'm saying that it's not a how-to manual, but I hope that it is the metaphysical basis on which we can then find actionable. And that hope point is very central because we are still doing it. Many of us are still doing it. We are apportioning blame. We are making people feel bad about themselves. And the Hindutva Brigade is offering many ways of feeling good about yourself. So that is a very central point. Thank you. There was a hand at the back there. Did somebody want over there? Ram, you want to come in a bit? Govind, you want to make a close?
I think you summed it up perfectly.
So I just want to thank Rohini Nilekani in particular, because this book would not have happened without her. She kept bullying me actually. Okay, what is this? Those old articles, you have just forgotten about them. They are not even online anymore because they were floating on some website and then it was taken off and everything. So I want to thank her for making me bring it out. Thank you so much. Yeah. And thanks to BIC again.